I always knew I was the second best child in my family. It wasn't something my parents ever said directly, they didn't need to. Their actions spoke louder than any words could. My brother Mike was their golden child, their firstborn, their pride and joy. 2 years older than me, he could do no wrong in their eyes. I remember when we were kids, and he broke Mom's favorite vase while playing baseball in the house. Instead of scolding him, Mom just smiled and said, "Boys will be boys. At least you're practicing your swing, honey." But when I accidentally spilled juice on the carpet a week later, it was a different story entirely. "Irene, how could you be so careless?" Mom's voice still rings in my ears. "Go get the cleaning supplies right now. And you're grounded for the weekend." These double standards were the backdrop of my childhood. Mike would get C's in school, and our parents would say, "Well, he's just more focused on sports right now." But if I got an A- instead of an A+, they'd barely look up from their phones and mutter, "You could do better if you tried harder." The only person who saw me, really saw me, was my grandmother. She lived just a few blocks away, and her house became my sanctuary. Sure, she doted on Mike too, brought him cookies, went to all his games, the works. But unlike my parents, she noticed my achievements too. The pattern continued year after year. Mike's birthdays were grand affairs with bounce houses, dozens of friends, and elaborate cakes. My birthdays, well, half the time my parents forgot them entirely. I remember my 10th birthday, I sat at the breakfast table, waiting for someone to say something. Mom was busy helping Mike with his science project, and Dad was reading the newspaper. That evening, when I finally worked up the courage to remind them, Dad looked genuinely surprised. "Oh, right. Happy birthday, kiddo. We'll get you something next time we're at the mall." They never did. Only Grandma remembered. She'd always come over with a small gift and a homemade cupcake with a single candle. "Make a wish, my dear," she'd whisper, and for a moment, I felt like I mattered. I learned to live with it, to expect nothing and be surprised by even the smallest acknowledgement. I threw myself into my studies, joined every academic club I could find, and tried to build my own identity away from Mike's shadow. But at home, I might as well have been invisible. The day Grandma got sick, everything changed. I was 14, and Mike was 16. I spent every afternoon at the hospital with her, doing my homework in the uncomfortable chair beside her bed while she dozed. Mike visited too, but less frequently. He was busy with football practice, and our parents said that was important for his future. One evening, just a few days before she passed away, she called our whole family to her hospital room. Mom, Dad, Mike, and I gathered around her bed. Her voice was weak but determined as she looked directly at Dad. "Son," she said, gripping his hand, "I want you to promise me something about my inheritance." She paused to catch her breath. "Promise me you'll use it for both of their educations, Mike's and Irene's. Both of them need to go to college." Dad nodded solemnly. "Of course, Mom, I promise you, right here in front of everyone, that your inheritance will go to both Mike's and Irene's education." After Grandma's death, I threw myself into my studies with even more determination. Even though I knew about her inheritance and Dad's promise, I wasn't taking any chances. I wanted to prove that I deserved to go to college on my own merits. My report cards were filled with A's, but nobody at home ever asked to see them. I'd leave them on the kitchen counter, hoping someone would notice, but they'd end up buried under takeout menus and Mike's football schedules. The only person who would have proudly displayed them on her fridge was no longer there to do so. I joined the debate club, despite my hands shaking every time I had to speak in public. "Clear your throat less, Irene," my debate coach would say. "You have good arguments, let them hear them." Gradually, my voice grew stronger, though at home it remained as invisible as ever. I won first place in the state science fair with my project on renewable energy. The local newspaper even ran a small article about it. I left it on Dad's desk, but it disappeared under a stack of papers, unread. Meanwhile, Mike's every football game made it onto our family calendar, marked with bright red circles. Then came Mike's graduation. Suddenly, our normally quiet house transformed into party central. Mom spent weeks planning every detail, from the catering to the decorations. "We're so proud of you, son," Dad announced during the party, clinking his glass for attention. The backyard was packed with relatives, friends, and what seemed like half the neighborhood. "Not only has our boy graduated, but he's also heading to Preston University this fall." Mike sat there grinning, keys to his new car dangling from his fingers. I stood in the corner, holding a plate of cake I wasn't eating. "Thanks to Mom's inheritance," Dad continued, his voice thick with emotion, "we've been able to secure Mike's future at one of the best colleges in the country. She would have been so proud." The guests erupted in applause and congratulations. 2 months later, we drove Mike to Preston University, 6 states away. Mom and Dad helped him move into his dorm, took hundreds of pictures, and spent 2 extra days in town just to make sure he settled in okay. After that, our house became Mike's satellite campus. Mom and Dad called him every day, sometimes putting him on speaker so his voice would fill the kitchen during dinner. They drove up to visit him at least twice a month, always returning with stories about his classes, his friends, his football practice. Meanwhile, I continued my senior year, alone in my quiet room, studying for tests nobody would celebrate, winning competitions nobody would attend, preparing for a future I wasn't sure I'd be allowed to have. 2 years passed quickly, and I finished high school at the top of my class. Not that anyone at home noticed or cared. On graduation day, I put on my white dress and honor cords alone. My parents had left 3 days earlier for a much-needed vacation with Mike. "We'll bring you back a souvenir," Mom had said casually, as if missing my graduation was as trivial as missing a regular Tuesday dinner. I sat among my classmates during the ceremony, watching other parents beam and take photos. My friend Jenny's mom even took some pictures of me, saying, "Your parents will want to see these." I didn't have the heart to tell her they probably wouldn't. While my classmates celebrated with their families, I went home and started working on my college applications. I'd been preparing for this moment for months, carefully crafting essays, gathering recommendation letters, and documenting all my academic achievements. The acceptance letters started arriving a week later. Evergreen State University offered me a full scholarship with free dorm accommodation. Their letter praised my academic achievements and extracurricular activities. Then came the acceptance from Blackwood Private College. Their program was exactly what I wanted, though the tuition was steep, not as expensive as Mike's Preston University, but still substantial. I knew my parents still had my portion of Grandma's inheritance. I'd overheard them discussing money matters enough times to know it was there, waiting, just as Grandma had intended. So I waited for their return, the Blackwood acceptance letter safely tucked away in my desk drawer, the Evergreen offer hidden as my backup plan. They came back tanned and cheerful 2 weeks later. Mike had already headed back to Preston to hang with his brothers, as Dad proudly announced. I waited until after dinner, when they were relaxed and still sharing vacation stories. "I got accepted to Blackwood College," I said during a rare moment of silence. "Their business program is highly ranked." Mom glanced up briefly from her phone. "That's nice, dear." "I'd need to pay tuition," I continued, my heart beating faster. I was hoping we could use my portion of Grandma's inheritance. The silence that followed was different, heavier somehow. Dad set down his coffee mug, exchanging a look with Mom. "We don't have money for your college tuition," he said flatly. I felt my chest tighten. "But, Grandma's inheritance? She made you promise, in front of everyone, that it would go to both our educations." Mom had the decency to look slightly uncomfortable, but Dad just shrugged. "We spent that money on our vacation. The rest went to your brother, he needed it more." "It was an expensive trip," Mom added, as if that explained everything. "And Mike's tuition isn't getting any cheaper. He needs the extra support." I stared at my parents, trying to process what they'd just said. The room felt too small, too hot. "You promised her," I said, my voice shaking. "Grandma made you promise." "We were all there, you, Mom, Mike, me." She made you swear you'd use the money for both our educations. Dad took another sip of his coffee, not even looking at me. I just didn't want to upset my mother in her final days. We knew from the start we wouldn't be giving you any of that money. Something inside me snapped. 18 years of being invisible, of swallowing my words, of accepting their neglect, it all came rushing out at once. You're liars, I shouted, standing up so quickly my chair fell backward. You're nothing but liars who betrayed your own mother's dying wish. You spent my college money on a vacation. You gave it to Mike, who already had his share. You've been lying to everyone, to Grandma, to me, too. Get out. Dad's words cut through my tirade like ice. I thought I'd misheard. What? You heard your father, Mom said, her voice cold. Get out of this house. You're 18 now, an adult. If you're so independent that you can talk to us this way, you can take care of yourself. Before I could respond, Mom grabbed my arm and practically dragged me upstairs to my room. She yanked my old suitcase from under the bed and threw it at my feet. Pack your things, she said, pulling open my drawers. I want you out of here first thing tomorrow morning. I stood there, frozen, watching as she pulled out the suitcase's expandable handle. This was really happening. My own parents were throwing me out. Mom, I started to say, but the look she gave me was one I'd never seen before, like I was a stranger who had invaded her home. That's when it hit me, they were strangers too. Maybe they always had been. The people I'd been trying to please all these years, hoping for their love and approval, didn't really exist. These were just two people who happened to share my DNA. I packed in silence. Clothes, books, my laptop, the few precious photos I had of Grandma. Mom stood in the doorway watching, arms crossed, as if making sure I wouldn't steal anything. As if there was anything in this house I wanted anymore. When my suitcase was full, I took out my phone and texted Jenny, "Can I come over? It's important." Her response was immediate, "Of course, doors open." I walked out without saying goodbye. Nobody tried to stop me. Jenny's parents had given her a small apartment for her 18th birthday, just a few blocks away. She was waiting at her door when I arrived, took one look at my face and my suitcase, and pulled me into a hug. That night, as we sat on her couch drinking hot chocolate, I made my decision. I would accept the offer from Evergreen State University. The full scholarship and free dorm would be my ticket to independence. But I needed money for books and living expenses, so I'd have to work first. That summer at Sunnyside Cafe taught me more than just how to make the perfect latte. Between taking orders and balancing trays, I learned what it meant to stand on my own feet. My tips went straight into a savings account, growing dollar by dollar, while my paychecks covered basic necessities. When fall came, I hugged Jenny goodbye and moved into my dorm at Evergreen State. My roommate Sarah took one look at my sparse belongings and offered to share her mini fridge. That simple kindness almost made me cry. I found a job at the college library, shelving books and manning the reference desk during evening shifts. Between classes, work, and studying, I barely had time to think about my former life. The library became my sanctuary, quiet, orderly, and predictable, everything my family life hadn't been. When relatives called, their questions were always strange and probing. Aunt Linda's voice would be full of barely concealed concern. "Do you have somewhere to sleep at night, dear?" Uncle Bob would ask, "Are you getting enough to eat?" I'd answer truthfully that I was fine, wondering what stories they'd been told about my life. Sometimes Jenny would start to tell me news about my family. "Hey, I heard your brother," but I'd cut her off immediately. "I don't want to know," I'd say, and she'd understand. The holidays could have been hard, but Jenny's family wouldn't hear of me spending them alone. That first Christmas at their house, I sat at their dining table, surrounded by warmth and genuine affection. Jenny's dad, Mr. Peterson, pulled me aside after dinner. "Irene," he said, his voice serious but kind, "I've been watching how hard you work. When you graduate, there'll be a place for you at Peterson Technologies if you want it." I accepted on the spot, tears threatening to spill over. Finally, someone was noticing my effort, my determination. Graduation came faster than I expected. I stood on stage, accepting my diploma with highest honors, scanning the crowd out of habit. Jenny and her parents were there, cheering loudly enough to drown out the crowd. I didn't look for any other familiar faces. My first day at Peterson Technologies, I walked in wearing a suit I'd bought with my library savings. Within 6 months, I was leading my own projects. By year 2, I had a team reporting to me. Mr. Peterson's faith in me proved well-founded. I threw myself into every challenge, worked longer hours than anyone else, and quickly gained a reputation for solving problems others couldn't crack. The promotions and raises followed naturally. Soon I was earning more than I'd ever dreamed possible during those days of counting tips at the cafe. I bought professional clothes, started taking yoga classes, went on vacation with Jenny to places I'd only seen in magazines. My birthdays became celebrations of achievement rather than reminders of neglect. Jenny would organize small gatherings, just close friends from work, good food, and genuine laughter. No forced family dynamics, no pretense, no pain. My 27th birthday was approaching, and I had a secret I'd been keeping even from Jenny. For the past 5 years, I'd been saving every extra penny, Christmas bonuses, performance rewards, even the money I would have spent on lunch by bringing sandwiches from home instead of buying from the cafe downstairs. Every dollar went into my special savings account, labeled simply Dream. The dream became reality 3 weeks before my birthday. I stood in an empty living room with high ceilings and huge windows, hardwood floors gleaming in the afternoon sun, and signed the papers that made it mine. My own apartment. Not rented, owned. "Congratulations," the realtor said, handing me the keys. "It's all yours." That evening, feeling a bit bold and maybe a little proud, I did something I rarely did. I posted on social media. Just me, standing in my empty but beautiful living room, keys dangling from my fingers, unable to contain my smile. The caption read, "Early birthday gift to myself. Dreams do come true when you work hard enough. New home, birthday gift, blessed." The likes and comments started pouring in immediately. Jenny's was first, of course, finally. "Can't wait for the housewarming party." My colleagues chimed in with their congratulations. Even some relatives I hadn't heard from in years liked the post and left comments like, "So proud of you," and "Happy early birthday." I was sitting at my desk at work a week later, reviewing quarterly reports, when my phone buzzed. The number wasn't saved in my contacts, but I recognized it instantly. My mother's voice came through the speaker, sweet as honey and just as sticky. "Irene, sweetheart. I saw your beautiful new apartment on Facebook. And I suddenly remembered your birthday is coming up." Suddenly remembered. After many years of forgetting. "It's wonderful to see you doing so well," she continued, her voice dripping with an enthusiasm I'd never heard directed at me before. "Your father and I have been thinking, we should celebrate your birthday properly this year. At home. We'll invite the whole family." I almost laughed out loud. Of course. Years of silence, and now that I had a fancy apartment, suddenly I was worth remembering? Worth celebrating? "We've missed you so much," she added, and I could almost see her practiced, concerned expression through the phone. "It's time for the family to come together again. What do you say?" I should have said no. Should have told her exactly what I thought about her sudden attack of maternal affection. Instead, I heard myself saying, "Sure, Mom, why not?" As I hung up the phone, I couldn't help but smile, though there was no warmth in it. After all these years, I was curious to see what game they were playing. I pulled up to my parents' house in my new Mercedes, the engine purring softly as I parked. The contrast between my car and the house was stark, peeling paint, missing shingles, and overgrown lawn. My parents appeared in the doorway before I even reached it. Their eyes locked onto my car first, then shifted to my designer suit and heels. I watched their expressions change, noticed the calculating gleam in their eyes. "Irene," Mom rushed forward to hug me, her enthusiasm almost making me step back. "You look expensive." Dad hung back, trying and failing to look casual. They both seemed older than I remembered, more gray hair, deeper wrinkles, shoulders slightly stooped. The inside of the house was worse than the outside. The furniture I remembered from my childhood was worn and faded, the carpets threadbare. And there, sprawled on the couch like he'd never left, was Mike. He'd gained weight, lost hair, and sat beside a young woman whose pregnant belly strained against her dress. "Hey, sis," he said, not bothering to get up. "Meet Sarah, my wife." Mom quickly jumped in with explanations I hadn't asked for. "Mike's staying with us temporarily. Well, college wasn't quite the right fit. But he's got some promising job prospects." Going on 9 years of temporary, I thought, but kept my face neutral. "The guests will be here soon," Dad said, gesturing to a table laden with food. "But first, tell us about your job. That's quite a car you're driving. Must be making good money, huh?" "Things are fine," I replied, smoothly sidestepping the question. "The catering looks nice." "But what exactly do you do?" Mom pressed. "That apartment of yours must cost a fortune." "And a Mercedes." I smiled blandly. "I work in management. How's everyone been?" Before they could probe further, the doorbell rang. Suddenly the house was full of relatives, aunts, uncles, cousins I hadn't seen in nearly a decade. They swarmed around me with hugs and exclamations. Aunt Helen pulled me aside during the commotion, her voice low. "I'm so glad you finally came to your senses, dear. Your parents have been so worried. It must have been hard, living like that." I turned to her, confused. "Like what?" She glanced around before whispering, "You know, after you ran away with that boy. Living on the streets, refusing to work." She patted my arm. "But look at you now. All cleaned up and respectable again." The pieces clicked into place. While I'd been building my career, earning promotions, and buying my apartment, my parents had been spinning tales about their shameful runaway daughter. Their version of events painted them as the worried, abandoned parents of a wayward child. And I'd played right into their hands by cutting off contact with the extended family. Once everyone was seated at the table, Dad stood up, raising his glass. "We're here today to celebrate our wonderful daughter," he announced, his voice thick with fake emotion. "We're so proud of what she's become." Mom dabbed at her eyes with a napkin, tears I'd seen her practice for school plays decades ago. "The family should stick together," she said, reaching for my hand across the table. I kept mine firmly in my lap. "That's what matters most, family supporting each other." The emphasis on supporting wasn't subtle. Neither was the way her eyes darted to my designer watch, my expensive jewelry. "Your father and I," she continued, sniffling, "we always knew you'd make something of yourself." I let the silence stretch for a moment after she finished. Then I stood up slowly, smoothing my dress. "Thank you all for coming," I said, my voice clear and steady. "It's interesting, actually, that my parents remembered my birthday this year. It's a first, really." The room grew quiet. Mom's fake tears dried up instantly. "You know, growing up, they never celebrated my birthdays. Not one. But I suppose an apartment in the nice part of town and a Mercedes make birthdays more memorable, don't they?" "Irene," Dad warned, "this isn't the time." "Oh, but it is." I turned to address the whole table. "Aunt Helen told me something interesting earlier. Apparently, I ran away from home at 18 with some boy. Became homeless? Refused to work?" I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I'd love to hear more about this mysterious bad boy I supposedly ran away with." Mom jumped in, her voice high and nervous. "Sweetheart, the past is the past. Let's not." "The truth," I said, raising my voice over hers, "is that they kicked me out. The day after my high school graduation." "Want to know why?" Mike shifted uncomfortably in his seat. A few relatives nodded. "Because I reminded them of the promise they made to our grandmother on her deathbed, that they'd use her inheritance for both Mike's and my college education." "Remember that promise, Dad?" You made it in front of everyone. But instead, they spent my portion on a luxury vacation and gave the rest to Mike. Then they threw me out when I dared to question them about it. That's not true, Mom protested weakly, but I could see the recognition in the relatives' eyes. I got into college on my own merits. Worked my way through it. Built my career from nothing. And in 9 years, they never once called. Never once remembered my birthday. Until they saw my new apartment on Facebook. The silence in the room was deafening. Aunt Helen was looking at my parents with undisguised disgust. Uncle Bob was shaking his head slowly. I'm sorry for disrupting this lovely party, I said, picking up my purse. But I thought you all deserved to know the truth. I didn't come back for a reconciliation. I came back to set the record straight. The drive home felt liberating. In my apartment, everything was ready, a catered dinner I'd arranged days ago, knowing exactly how this evening would end. Jenny arrived first, followed by my colleagues and true friends. We ate, drank, and celebrated, not just my birthday, but my freedom from the lies. The messages started coming that night, Mom begging me to reconsider, Dad saying they were wrong, Mike asking for help with his temporary situation. I blocked their numbers one by one.